My name is Lauren Mitchell, and I never imagined the most unforgettable moment of my wedding would be the sound of a $5,000 cake crashing to the floor, followed by the smirk on my sister's face. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a joke, it was a message, and I heard it loud and clear. The cake had taken 6 months to design. Each tier told a story not just of my relationship with Ethan, the man I was marrying, but of the legacy of the women in our family who had passed down recipes, love, and resilience through generations. That cake wasn't just dessert. It was history, it was symbolism, it was sacred. And my younger sister Madison, with her carefully calculated oops, decided to destroy it in front of 120 guests. Because I told her no. No, I wouldn't buy her a $950,000 condo as a birthday gift. No, I wouldn't dip into my savings, built from 11 years of hustle in the real estate world, to sponsor another one of her dreams. No, I wouldn't keep enabling a woman who's 25 years old and still throws tantrums like she's 12. But if you think the cake was the worst part, you haven't heard what happened next. If you've ever been forced to choose between peace and self-respect, leave a like and walk this path with me. Madison and I grew up in Atlanta. Our parents weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. My dad, Harold, worked in civil engineering, and Mom was a high school counselor. They believed in rules, well, for me at least. From the time I was 8, I heard it over and over again, Lauren, you're the older one. You should know better. That phrase would shape my entire childhood. I had curfews, I had chores, I had standards. Madison, she had grace, passes, excuses. When she broke something, it was an accident. When I did, it was irresponsible. If she cried, everything stopped. If I cried, it was too much drama. It was like growing up in two different homes, only we shared the same roof. I got my first job at 15 bagging groceries to save for a used car. Madison, at the same age, got a brand new Mazda with a bow on top and no obligation to pay for a drop of gas. When I questioned the double standard, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Your sister is delicate." Delicate. That word haunted me. Madison was delicate when she dropped out of college twice. Delicate when she maxed out our father's credit card and cried until he paid it off. Delicate when she moved in with a boyfriend who cheated on her 3 times and still blamed the world when it didn't work out. And every time she burned another bridge, our family just kept laying down planks for her to walk over, again and again. I, on the other hand, built my life from dust. No shortcuts, no bailouts, just long nights, risk, and grit. I carved out my place in the competitive Atlanta real estate market. By 27, I had made my first 6 figures. By 29, I was set to marry Ethan, an architect with calloused hands, and a kind soul who fell for me, not the version of me my family barely noticed. I was finally building something that was mine. So when I told Madison just 2 months before my wedding that I couldn't buy her a condo, not wouldn't, couldn't, I meant it from a place of honesty. We were saving for our first home. We had just paid deposits for the venue photography, my dress. There wasn't room for her entitlement. But for Madison, the word no wasn't just rejection, it was betrayal. She asked for the condo like someone might ask for an extra side of guacamole. "You sell million-dollar homes all the time," she said. "This wouldn't even be a dent." When I refused, she stood up, knocked over her coffee, and hissed through her teeth, "You always think you're better than me." I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. I wanted to believe she'd show up at the wedding, smile, stand by my side, and maybe grow up a little. But Madison doesn't get even. She gets dramatic. And if I had paid attention to the way she said, "Can't wait to see that fancy cake," with a twitch in her smile, maybe I would have known. That cake with its tears, its symbols, its sparkle wasn't just dessert. It was my grandmother's legacy, my love story, my pride. And Madison shattered it with one calculated bump of her hip and a soft oops that sent the room into silence. That was the moment I stopped pretending. If you've ever had a moment when someone forced you to choose between loyalty and self-worth, tell me in the comments. I'd love to know I'm not the only one. And if you believe in standing your ground even when it's hard, hit subscribe. There's more to this story than one ruined cake. I used to think being the older sibling meant being the stronger one, the wiser one, the one who simply knows better. At least that's what my parents told me, over and over again. But the truth, it just meant being the one who was expected to endure more. Growing up in the Mitchell household, there was a clear unspoken rule: Lauren carries the weight, Madison gets the grace. I was 9 when I first noticed it. Madison, barely 2, had spilled grape juice across Mom's favorite ivory couch. I rushed to help, blotting the stain with paper towels. Mom stormed in and screamed at me, "Why weren't you watching her?" I was 9. That moment would become a blueprint for my life. Every mistake Madison made somehow became my responsibility. Every achievement of mine just expected. No celebration, no praise, just a nod and another chore. By the time I hit high school, I had 3 part-time jobs, babysitting on Fridays, bussing tables on weekends, and filing paperwork at a small law firm after school. I wasn't saving up for anything flashy. I just didn't want to ask my parents for lunch money. Meanwhile, Madison, well, she needed emotional support. According to Mom, that was priceless. She cried over everything, a chipped nail, a breakup, not getting picked for choir. And every time she cried, my parents pulled out their invisible armor and rushed to protect her. I don't think they realized they were building a monster. A sweet-smiled, softly spoken monster who'd learned that the world bent for tears, not effort. And I became invisible. I remember the day I got accepted into college. A full-ride academic scholarship to one of the top business schools in the state. I came home shaking with excitement, letter in hand. Madison had just failed algebra. Guess who got all the attention that night? You've always been the smart one, Mom said dismissively. We need to focus on Madison right now. That sentence stung in a way I can't describe. But I kept pushing. I thought maybe if I succeeded hard enough, they'd finally see me. I graduated top of my class, landed my first real estate internship at 20, closed my first deal by 21. And every step of the way, I kept hoping my parents would say something. Anything. They didn't. Instead, they updated the family group chat with photos of Madison's new tattoo. She's expressing herself, Dad wrote with pride. I couldn't even be mad, just numb. What made it worse was Madison wasn't evil. She wasn't cruel in the overt, slapping your face way. She was subtle, passive-aggressive, a master manipulator. Whenever we were together at family dinners, she'd lean in and say things like, Wow, Lauren, you're still doing that real estate thing? That must be exhausting. Or, you always look so professional. I could never pull that off, I guess. I'm just more free-spirited. She would lace every compliment with a jab, every smile with a warning. And my parents, they never noticed. Or worse, they did and chose not to. When Ethan came into my life, he noticed immediately. Your sister treats you like a threat, he said, one night after dinner. But you act like you owe her something. It stopped me cold. Because I did feel like I owed her something. I didn't know why. Maybe because I'd been told my whole life to give more, bend, more absorb, more just to keep her from breaking. But I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold the weight of someone else's immaturity. If you've ever felt like the strong one in the family, but deep down you were just the one no one protected, tell me I'm not alone. Share your story in the comments. You never know who you might help feel seen. By the time I hit 29, I was doing more than holding the weight, I was funding it. Madison hadn't held a full-time job in years. Yet she always had the latest phone, new clothes, fresh nails. Guess where that came from? Birthday gifts. Graduation gifts. I'm stressed out gifts. And the guilt? Well, that came for free. She made me believe I was heartless if I didn't help. You have so much, she'd say, eyes wide, voice trembling, and I have nothing. But I'd worked for every bit of what I had. And somehow that became the crime. So when she asked for a condo as a birthday gift, I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was how angry she got when I said no. The kind of anger that doesn't disappear quietly. The kind of anger that brews, simmers, and waits for the perfect moment to explode. And as it turns out, my wedding was the moment she chose. It's one thing to grow up in someone's shadow. It's another to be told that shadow deserves more light than you ever will. That's how it felt living with Madison. She wasn't born cruel, but she was raised in a way that taught her the world would always clean up her messes. That crying got results. That if she wanted something, she just had to make it everyone else's problem. And for years, that problem was mine. She learned early how to make the people around her uncomfortable enough to give in. I learned how to avoid setting her off. If I said no to letting her borrow a dress, she'd cry in the living room until Mom came and forced me to just be the bigger person. If she got caught cheating on a test in high school, somehow it was the teacher's fault for not explaining it clearly. If I ever got frustrated and pushed back, if I ever said out loud that it wasn't fair, my parents would fall silent. Like I'd said something too ugly to acknowledge. You've always been stronger, Dad would whisper. Madison's still figuring things out. That phrase, still figuring things out, followed us into adulthood. When I graduated college and started my first job, Madison was still figuring things out. When I got promoted to senior agent, Madison was taking time to focus on her mental health. When I bought my own condo with my name on the deed, Madison was learning to align her energy before making big decisions. But aligning her energy didn't stop her from draining mine. She'd call it midnight in tears, because she overdrew her account on takeout and needed gas money. She'd guilt-trip me over missing her friend's art show even though I had an open house with clients. She'd tag me in Instagram posts with captions like, "Wish my rich sister could make time for her family." It was constant and subtle, like emotional waterboarding drop by drop until I couldn't breathe. I tried to set boundaries gently at first. I offered to help her make a budget. She said I was trying to control her. I told her I couldn't keep giving money without a plan. She called me cold and said, "Maybe success has changed you." And maybe it had. Maybe I was done playing the role of the quiet, responsible sister while she walked through life like it was a spa day someone else paid for. But even with all of that, I still tried. When she hinted at wanting her own place, I didn't laugh. I didn't remind her of the time she abandoned an apartment lease and ghosted the landlord. I simply offered to co-sign something I absolutely did not want to do, because some part of me still believed that helping her meant loving her. I even created a small moving fund, $2,000. My own money carved out of my savings with Ethan just in case Madison needed help getting on her feet. Security deposit, maybe a used couch, basic furniture. It wasn't about spoiling her, it was about giving her a chance. But to Madison, it wasn't enough. Because when I sat across from her at that coffee shop 2 months before my wedding, she wasn't there to thank me. She was there to upgrade her wish list. She looked me straight in the face and asked for a $950,000 condo. Downtown, 2 bedrooms, fully updated. "I want this one," she said like she was picking out shoes. "It's close to all the best brunch spots." When I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was unbelievable, she tilted her head and frowned. "You make money off houses like this all the time," she said. "You and Ethan are saving up, right? You could buy this and let me pay you back later." There was no plan, no budget, no job, just expectation. And I realized in that moment she didn't just believe she deserved the condo. She believed I owed it to her. I told her no, not harshly, not with judgment, just no. I said I could still co-sign the lease we talked about, that the moving fund was still waiting, that this $1 million birthday wish wasn't realistic. She stood up so quickly she nearly knocked over her iced latte. "You have everything," she hissed, "the fiancé, the money, the big wedding, and you can't even help your own sister." I remember staring at the table after she left, heart-pounding coffee trembling in my hands. I thought that would be the end of it. But for Madison, rejection was never the end. It was just the start of her revenge. If you've ever had someone twist your kindness into a weapon against you, I'd love to hear how you found peace. Leave your story in the comments. Maybe someone out there needs it. After that coffee shop ambush, I knew things would be tense. But I didn't realize just how far Madison would go to punish me for saying no. 2 days later, Ethan and I went to my parents' house for our usual Sunday dinner, a long-standing tradition that truthfully had started feeling more like emotional endurance training than a meal. I braced myself the moment we pulled into the driveway. Madison's car was already there, and I had no doubt she'd told her version of events. Sure enough, the second we walked through the door, I felt it, the stiffness in my mom's hug, the slightly forced smile from Dad, the way Madison didn't even glance up from her phone at the dinner table. Something was brewing. I didn't have to wait long to find out what. Halfway through dinner, between the overcooked roast and a painfully awkward silence, my father cleared his throat. "Lauren," he said, putting down his fork, "Madison mentioned she found a condo she really likes downtown. She thought you might be willing to assist." His voice was calm, measured, like he was negotiating a business deal, not asking me to shell out $1 million. I kept my expression neutral. "Yes," I said evenly. "She asked me to buy it for her." Mom blinked. "Buy it. Or at least pay the down payment," I added, "as a birthday gift." Their reactions told me everything. Clearly, Madison had filtered the story to paint herself as reasonable, as someone just seeking a little help from her big sister, not someone demanding a luxury home like it was a handbag. "Well," Mom said cautiously, "maybe there's a compromise, something more modest." I smiled politely. "I've already offered to co-sign her lease and help with moving costs. That's what I can afford right now. Ethan and I are saving for our own home." Madison finally looked up, her voice sharp. "But you're a realtor. You sell places like that all the time." "I sell them," I said. "I don't own them. There's a difference." She rolled her eyes. "You just don't want me to have nice things." That line, so absurd, so detached from any reality, should have made me angry. But all I felt was exhaustion. And that's when Dad chimed in with the classic, "What about a loan? Maybe you could help her secure financing." I couldn't help it. I let out a small, bitter laugh. With her income and credit, I said, "That's not how loans work. And co-signing a mortgage that size would jeopardize Ethan and me. We're not doing that." Madison's voice dropped an octave. I knew that tone. It was the beginning of one of her emotional storms. So you're just saying no? I nodded. Yes, I'm saying no. My mother glanced nervously between us. The wedding's so close. Maybe we can revisit this after we all want your day to be perfect. It was the same script, the same subtle message I'd heard my whole life. Keep the peace. Don't rock the boat. Sacrifice your needs for harmony. But harmony built on silence isn't peace, it's pressure waiting to explode. There's nothing to revisit, I said gently but firmly. I've made my offer. It's generous, and it's fair. The rest of dinner was frosty. Madison refused to speak. Dad made awkward small talk about the weather. Mom kept sending me pleading glances I refused to meet. As we got ready to leave, she pulled me aside. You know how she gets when she's disappointed, she whispered. I do, I replied, my voice flat. And I'm done paying the price for it. If you've ever been expected to carry someone else's emotions just to keep your family from falling apart, you're not alone. Drop a comment below your story matters. The week that followed was strained. Madison showed up late to the final dress fitting and made a scene about the color of the bridesmaid dresses. At the rehearsal dinner, she complained loudly about the menu, then toasted to Lauren's fancy life and all the people she forgot along the way. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't even clever, it was pure sabotage slowly simmering. And I still clung to the hope, foolish, naive hope that she'd come to her senses before the big day. But when someone's been handed the world without ever being asked to earn it, they don't wake up one day and decide to become accountable. They just find new ways to destroy anything that makes them feel small. And I was the easiest target she'd ever had. By the time the week of the wedding arrived, I had grown so numb to Madison's passive-aggressive outbursts that I stopped reacting altogether. I told myself, just get through it. That became my internal chant. Just get through the rehearsal dinner. Just get through the seating chart arguments. Just get through her comments like sage green isn't really my color, but I guess this isn't my wedding. It was like she wanted me to snap. She wanted a reaction. But I wouldn't give it to her. Not because I was afraid, but because I was tired of decades of emotional baiting. Tired of being dragged back into a role I never asked for, the fixer, the appeaser, the one who keeps the peace while silently breaking. When I thought it couldn't escalate further, Madison found a new line to cross. It was the day before the wedding. A soft spring breeze filtered through the venue's grand windows as Ethan and I arrived early to oversee setup. Everything we'd planned for was finally coming together. The antique table arrangements, the string quartet rehearsing under the pergola, the floral arch bathed in sunlight. And then came the cake. Delivered by the bakery's van right at 3 p.m., it was a 5-tier masterpiece that took my breath away. Each layer was inspired by something personal: the lace from my grandmother's veil, the golden notes from Ethan's favorite symphony, the blush pink florals we used to press into our engagement journal. But more than that, it was the buttercream. Champagne buttercream passed down from my grandmother's original handwritten recipe book. A recipe she whispered to me before she passed, saying, "This is for your wedding day, baby. Don't let anyone else have it." And I hadn't. I guarded it like a secret, worked for months with a baker to get it right. That cake wasn't just a dessert. It was legacy. It was love. And I should have known Madison would find a way to taint even that. During the final walkthrough, she stood beside me, arms crossed, and stared at the cake without a hint of awe. $5,000 for something people are just gonna eat, she muttered. Wild. I didn't answer. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the cake, on the brushstrokes of icing that had taken 3 days to complete, on the shimmering sugar flowers, delicately placed by hand. She didn't understand. Of course she didn't. She had never worked for anything long enough to attach meaning to it. She'd never invested her heart into something that took time, care, patience. But I had, and that's why her next words cut deep. I mean, I guess when you have that much money, it doesn't matter what you waste it on. That much money? As if I'd stumbled into wealth. As if my savings, my years of missed vacations and 14-hour days, my decision to skip birthday dinners so I could close on fixer-uppers in dead-end neighborhoods, didn't matter. As if this was easy. I turned to her, then finally meeting her gaze. You know, I said quietly, if you ever worked as hard to earn things as you do resenting people who have them, you'd probably have your own cake by now. She blinked. For once, no comeback. But I saw it. A flicker. Something coiled in her eyes, hurt maybe. Or rage. Or the realization that her power over me was slipping. And that terrified her. If you've ever stood your ground with someone who's used guilt as currency and watched their mask crack, you'll know that silence is the loudest victory. And if you've been there, leave a comment. Let's talk about how quiet strength is still strength. That night, I lay in bed next to Ethan, unable to sleep. My phone buzzed with messages from family members asking about table assignments and weather updates. But there was one message that stood out. It was from Madison, one sentence. "You'll regret this." I didn't reply. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't believe her. She could be furious. She could pout, whine, spin her stories like she always did. But this time I had drawn the line. This time I had said enough. And the next day, the day I was supposed to start a new chapter, she would cross a line no one could ignore. But not before I made one final promise to myself. No matter what happened, I would not be the one to fall apart. And if you've ever had to walk into a room knowing someone planned to ruin your moment, but you held your head high anyway, hit that subscribe button. We carry each other forward in courage. The morning of my wedding arrived with the kind of stillness you don't question, the kind that feels too perfect. Sunlight poured through the sheer white curtains of the bridal suite. Outside, the sky was a flawless blue, the breeze just enough to rustle the garden trees, but not disturb a single blossom. It was the kind of morning movies try to imitate, but rarely capture. And yet, even as I sat in the makeup chair surrounded by laughter and champagne flutes clinking, there was a quiet weight pressing down on my chest. I told myself it was nerves, but deep down I knew better. Madison arrived exactly on time, which was strange. She wasn't late, didn't complain, didn't make a scene. She slipped into the suite, complimented my dress, and even thanked the makeup artist. It felt wrong. Madison never showed up on time. She never complimented me, not sincerely. But there she was, sitting calmly in her bridesmaid dress, smiling like everything was fine. "Today's gonna be unforgettable," she said, sipping her mimosa. "Truly one for the books." That should have been my first clue. The ceremony itself was everything I'd dreamed. Ethan looked devastatingly handsome at the altar. I could see him blinking back tears as I walked down the aisle, my heart pounding in rhythm with the quartet's soft string melody. I clutched my bouquet tighter and focused on his eyes, steady, sure, and filled with the kind of love that makes everything else feel quiet. We said our vows, exchanged rings, and kissed to the sound of 100 guests standing and clapping. For a moment, Madison vanished from my mind entirely. That moment didn't last long. During the cocktail hour, while Ethan and I were off taking photos with the photographer near the ivy archway, the guests mingled just outside the reception hall. The venue team had just finished positioning the cake in its corner, a place chosen specifically to be lit by natural window light for the perfect golden hour photos. From a distance, I saw people wandering near it, admiring the detail, snapping photos. It stood like a sculpture, proud and intricate. Every tier told a piece of our story. At 8:15 p.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled cake cutting, I saw Madison begin walking toward it. Her movements weren't hurried. She wasn't stumbling. She walked with intention, the kind that makes your stomach tighten even before anything happens. Something in me knew. I handed my bouquet to Amanda, my maid of honor, and began walking quickly. But I wasn't fast enough. Madison reached the cake, stood there for a brief second, glanced to both sides, and then bumped the table with her hip just hard enough. It wobbled once, twice. Then the entire 5-tier masterpiece tilted and collapsed forward in slow motion. Buttercream, sugar flowers, lace fondant, all of it falling smashing into the floor. Gasps rippled across the reception like a wave. Conversations halted, the string music faltered, and then silence. I stood frozen. And Madison? She just smiled. "Oops," she said loud enough for the nearest 10 guests to hear. Guess I should have watched where I was going. The entire room knew it wasn't an accident. No one bumped a table like that by mistake. No one smirks after destroying a $5,000 custom-made cake unless they meant to. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble, not this time. Ethan appeared beside me, his hand sliding into mine like it always did when the ground shook beneath me. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. But I wasn't focused on the cake anymore. I was focused on Madison. Still standing there. Still smiling. Still pretending like this was some little incident that would be cleaned up and moved on from, just like all the others in her life. Except this time, she was wrong. I turned toward the stunned crowd, my voice steadier than I felt. "Well," I said into the silence, "it looks like dessert will be a little different tonight." A few guests let out nervous laughter. Amanda jumped into action, ushering the servers to pivot toward the backup dessert bar. The staff began cleaning the wreckage. Ethan pulled me close and kissed my temple. But inside me something snapped, and not in the way she wanted. Because she thought I'd explode. She thought I'd yell or cry or storm out. That I'd make a scene and somehow become the problem. But I didn't. And that probably scared her more than any outburst ever could. That night, Madison didn't just knock over a cake. She knocked over the last excuse I had for staying quiet, and I was finally ready to stop cleaning up her mess. You know how people say the truth always comes out. Well, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the truth gets buried under polite smiles, carefully phrased excuses, and that one line I'd heard too many times to count. You know how she gets when she's disappointed. That was the line my mother whispered in my ear minutes after the cake hit the floor, as if Madison had tripped on invisible regret and the universe had just forgiven her. I stood there, a bride on her wedding night, watching venue staff sweep up pieces of a cake that meant more to me than most people realized. It wasn't about money, it was about memory, about legacy, about effort, about what it costs to make something beautiful and how easily someone else can destroy it. But instead of comforting me, my mother turned to damage control. She didn't mean it, she said. She's just overwhelmed, she said. Let's not make a scene, please. And for a long time too long, I would have listened. I would have nodded, swallowed the moment, and pretended it didn't sting as much as it did. But not anymore. That night, I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't ruin my own wedding trying to salvage someone else's conscience. I let Madison sit in the consequences of silence. And while I smiled through the rest of the reception, took photos, danced with Ethan, thanked our guests, my mind was already moving. Because I had enabled her for too long. And when you feed a fire even with good intentions, all you do is help it grow. So after the last dance and the final farewell, when Ethan and I returned to our suite and kicked off our shoes in exhausted silence, I did something I had never done before. I opened my laptop, and I started taking everything back. First, I logged into the special savings account labeled M's Moving Fund. I moved the $2,000 I had set aside back into our joint savings. 2 clicks. Done. Then I drafted an email to the property manager of the apartment Madison had applied for, the one where I'd co-signed her lease paperwork weeks earlier. Subject line, co-sign withdrawal, change of circumstances. It was short, professional, and final. Due to new developments, I am formally withdrawing my offer to co-sign the lease application for Madison Mitchell. Please confirm this update as soon as possible. Ethan stood behind me as I clicked send. You sure? He asked. I didn't even hesitate. Yes, because if I don't draw this line now, she'll believe she can get away with anything. And worse, that I'll still help her. That moment felt strangely calm, not spiteful, not dramatic, just necessary. If you've ever realized that loving someone doesn't mean shielding them from consequences, I hope you'll share that story in the comments. I promise you someone else needs to hear it too. When I turned off my phone that night, I knew what would come next. The messages. The spin, the guilt, and I was ready for it, because something had shifted, and it wasn't about a cake or even a condo. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself I'd slowly given away to keep the peace. That piece never belonged to me anyway. If you've ever had to choose between being the villain in someone else's story and the hero in your own hit, like, leave a comment and subscribe. This is what it looks like to rewrite the narrative. I woke up to a war zone in my inbox. Even before I opened my phone, I could feel it, the buzzing, the missed calls, the tension radiating from the lock screen like heat off asphalt. 12 missed calls from Madison, 8 from my mother, 3 from my dad. I hadn't even had my first honeymoon breakfast, and already the real world, or rather their world, was pounding on the door of mine. Ethan looked over the rim of his coffee cup, watching me silently. You don't have to check it yet, he said, his voice soft. I know, I whispered, but I need to. I tapped into my voicemail. The first message was Madison. Her voice was shrill, frantic. They rejected my application. You have to fix this. You have to. Second message. 15 minutes later. They found my credit report. How I didn't even list all those cards. This is your fault. Third message. Mom, of course, honey. She's in full meltdown. Can't you just call the leasing office? You know how important this is to her. I closed my eyes. No apology, no ownership, just more pressure, more expectations. Same cycle, different day. They didn't want to fix her behavior. They wanted me to make it disappear. Again. I scrolled further and found one message that stopped me cold. Dad. Lauren, his voice began heavier than I'd ever heard it. This is bigger than the apartment. The university just emailed us about unpaid housing fees. They're threatening collections. Graduation might be on hold. I leaned back against the headboard, my stomach hollow. So the apartment rejection had triggered a full collapse. A house of financial cards finally falling apart now that no one could hold the base. Madison hadn't just been irresponsible. She'd been dishonest. I hadn't known about the outstanding student housing debt. I hadn't known she'd maxed out multiple credit cards. I certainly hadn't known she was about to lose her diploma. But I wasn't shocked. Because people like Madison, people who've been protected from every consequence, don't learn how to face themselves. They only learn how to manipulate others into doing it for them. And this time she had no one left to deflect to. I picked up my phone and dialed the apartment leasing office. Not as a sister, as a professional. I didn't mention her name. I just asked about credit policies, income verification, rejection reasons. The woman on the line was polite but firm. We've tightened requirements, she explained. Too many defaults post-pandemic. If applicants misrepresent income or omit debt, we flag it. Rejections are automatic in those cases. Translation, Madison lied on her application and got caught. Next, I called a financial advisor friend and asked about universities reporting unpaid housing debt. They absolutely do, she confirmed. Some even report to credit bureaus now. Holds on transcripts, delays in graduation, it's all standard. So it was real. Every piece of the mess was real. Not exaggerated, not dramatized, just finally exposed. I called Dad next. He sounded like a man who'd seen the truth and couldn't unsee it. She owes around $22,000 total, he said. 3 credit cards, car payments, the university fees. It's worse than we thought. I asked the question I already knew the answer to. And she expects you to pay all of it. He sighed. Yes. And your mother wants to take out a loan from her retirement fund to do it. Of course she does. But then, something I didn't expect. I told her not to, he said quietly. I told her we need to stop. That maybe this time Madison needs to figure out how to clean up her own mess. It was the first time in 30 years my father had drawn a line. If you've ever had to sit by while your family enabled a person you love, and you finally saw someone take a stand, tell me what that moment felt like. I want to know I'm not alone. After we hung up, I turned to Ethan, who'd been listening quietly. You okay? He asked. I nodded slowly. I think this might be the beginning of something different. Not easy, but different. Because this time it wasn't just me choosing boundaries. Someone else had finally joined me on the line. The shift was almost imperceptible at first, like a wind changing direction before the storm truly hits. My father's decision not to bail Madison out immediately was small on the surface. Just words, just hesitation. But for someone who had spent 2 decades deferring to my mother's instincts, especially when it came to Madison, it felt monumental. And that gave me a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years when it came to my family. Hope. Later that evening, while Ethan and I watched the sun slip beneath the Maui horizon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Dad. We're having a family meeting with Madison tonight. I'll let you know how it goes. I stared at that message longer than I should have. Not because I expected good news, I didn't. But because even the idea that someone besides me was confronting the truth, that was new territory. That night I got the full recap. Madison had walked into the meeting still riding the high of outrage. I just need help this one time, she'd apparently insisted. After that, I'll figure everything out. My mother had immediately jumped in to echo her plea. She's not asking for much. She's overwhelmed. But for the first time, my father didn't fold. He told her calmly, "We'll help you with the university debt, Madison, but only if you agree to 3 things: financial counseling, full-time employment within 30 days, and a plan to pay back a portion of what you owe." According to him, Madison exploded. Doors slammed. Accusations flew. She called them heartless. She said I had poisoned them. And then just when he thought the conversation was over, she came back an hour later. Different. Quiet. And she asked a question no one had ever heard from her before. What kind of job could I get with my degree that would actually support me? When my dad told me that over the phone the next day, his voice carried something fragile, a combination of pride and disbelief. It was the first time he said she's ever looked beyond the drama to ask a real question. And as much as I wanted to protect myself from false hope, I felt something shift in me too. Not forgiveness, but space. A little more breathing room for the possibility of something new. Because real change doesn't start with tears or apologies. It starts with questions that scare you. And if you've ever seen someone take that first step, even clumsily, you know how powerful that moment can be. Let me know in the comments what your first step looked like. We grow stronger sharing it. The next few days brought more surprises. Madison started showing up to job interviews. She met with a financial counselor at the community center. She cut up 2 of her credit cards. She even started talking about moving in with a roommate instead of trying to live solo in luxury. I didn't respond to her updates. I wasn't ready to trust yet, and she didn't push me to. But the silence between us for the first time wasn't filled with resentment. It was filled with rebuilding. My parents, too, began adjusting. Mom was still reluctant, but she stopped sending soft texts, asking me to reconsider helping Madison financially. She didn't pressure me to change my mind. She even admitted in a brief, cautiously worded email that perhaps they hadn't prepared Madison properly for adulthood. That alone was progress. And as the days went on, Ethan and I started to exhale again. Not because the storm was over, but because we weren't standing in it alone anymore. And sometimes that makes all the difference. If you've ever stood your ground and watched your family slowly, finally begin to understand, hit that like button. We aren't just surviving dysfunction. We're changing it one conversation at a time. When Ethan and I flew back from Maui, something inside me felt steadier. Not lighter, the weight of what happened with Madison still lingered, but more rooted, like I'd finally taken back control of a narrative that was never written for me in the first place. And then came the real test. A voicemail from Madison. Hey, so I know we haven't really talked since the wedding, but I wanted you to know I got the job. It's entry-level marketing assistant. Nothing glamorous, but it's full-time. I'm actually kind of proud. I'd like to talk if you're open to that. I played the message twice. It was the first time in my life Madison sounded like a person standing on her own feet instead of balancing on everyone else's shoulders. Ethan listened with me. Do you believe her? He asked gently. I didn't answer right away, because belief isn't a switch you flip on. Especially not after years of watching someone treat love like a debit card with no overdraft limit. But I could hear something in her voice. Accountability. It was faint, like a baby bird testing its wings, but it was there. Still, I wasn't ready to dive back into sisterhood. I needed distance. I needed proof that this change wasn't another performance, another strategic apology designed to win back convenience. So I waited. Weeks passed, quietly, peacefully. And then a small envelope arrived. No glitter, no flourish, just my name written in her careful handwriting. Inside was a card. On the front, a photo of a path through redwood trees. Inside, 5 handwritten lines. Lauren, I know sorry isn't enough, so I won't insult you with it. I destroyed something precious, and you still didn't destroy me in return. That taught me more than anything else ever has. Thank you for walking away instead of screaming. There was no manipulation, no guilt, just truth. And that more than any apology was what I'd waited for. But even then I didn't reply. 'Cause this wasn't about reunion. This was about respect. And I needed to see if she could continue without being rewarded. If you've ever chosen to let someone rebuild trust at their own pace, not yours, because you finally learned your boundaries matter just as much as theirs, share that below. You don't know who needs to hear it today. 3 months after our wedding, Ethan and I hosted a casual housewarming at our new home, a 3-bedroom mid-century we'd poured ourselves into fixing up. We didn't plan on inviting Madison, but she showed up anyway. And this time, she came differently. She didn't barge in, didn't try to center herself. She brought a bottle of sparkling cider, asked if we needed help setting up, and most surprisingly, she asked if it was okay that she was there. I looked at Ethan. He nodded, and I said yes. She mingled with guests, laughed at appropriate times, didn't dominate the conversation. When someone asked what she did for work, she smiled, modest, not performative. Marketing assistant, she said. Just getting started, but it's a beginning. A beginning. She didn't say it like she expected applause. She said it like someone who meant it. Later that evening, I caught her standing alone by the dessert table, staring at a mini version of the wedding cake, the same flavor, same design, made lovingly by the same baker as a private redo just for Ethan and me. I walked over, heart racing. She looked at me and said quietly, I still think about that day. I said nothing, but I didn't walk away. She didn't apologize, not directly, but maybe. She didn't need to. Her presence, steady, unentitled, was the closest thing to closure we'd ever had. And for the first time I realized I wasn't waiting for her to be someone else. I was waiting for me to stop expecting her to change in order for me to heal. This was my life, my home, my rules. And I'd already started living them with or without her. If you've ever found healing not in what someone said, but in what they finally stopped doing, I hope you'll like, comment, and subscribe. You're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, your silence is the loudest boundary you'll ever set. You'd think after a moment like that a truce not spoken, but felt everything would suddenly become easy. It didn't. Because family doesn't just snap into place after decades of imbalance. Healing is messier than that, slower, uncomfortable, sometimes even more confusing than the dysfunction it replaces. But for the first time we weren't pretending, and that mattered more than I can explain. A few weeks after the housewarming, I got a text from my mom. Lunch soon, just us girls, my treat. I stared at the message like it might dissolve if I blinked too hard. It was the first olive branch I'd received from her since the wedding. Not tied to guilt, not layered with suggestion, just lunch. I said yes. We met at a quiet bistro on the east side, the kind of place she used to drag me and Madison to when we were younger, back when she was still trying to force us into matching dresses and pretend we were close. This time it was just the two of us. And the silence at the beginning, it wasn't awkward, it was real. She stirred her iced tea, avoided eye contact for a beat, then said, "I think I owe you an apology." I raised an eyebrow. She took a breath. "For years I asked you to bend to accommodate your sister. I thought I was protecting her, but I realize now I was also avoiding her, avoiding what it would mean to hold her accountable." I said nothing, because that was enough. A real apology doesn't come with defense. It doesn't ask to be excused, it just lands. And if it's genuine, it doesn't need a reply right away. That lunch changed something between us. For the first time, I felt like she saw me not just as the strong one, but as her daughter, who had spent most of her life playing peacekeeper while quietly bleeding inside. From that point on, we talked more and about real things. She started opening up about her own childhood, her fears, how hard it was raising two daughters so different. She didn't try to justify the past, she just acknowledged it. And that was the beginning of us healing, too. Meanwhile, Madison continued her own version of growth. She didn't transform overnight. She didn't become a different person, but she stayed consistent. She went to every financial counseling session, and not just to check a box. She started budgeting. She learned to say, "I can't afford that," without shame. She got promoted to marketing coordinator within 4 months. And most shockingly, she stopped asking for money. Stopped dropping guilt bombs in my inbox. Stopped performing sadness to avoid accountability. She was figuring it out. One afternoon, she sent me a photo of her emergency fund progress tracker. It had little hand-drawn flowers around each dollar milestone. I'm finally learning to save her message read. And weirdly, it feels good. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional manipulation. It was honest. And that's when I knew we'd all grown more in 6 months than in the previous 6 years. If you've ever watched someone finally carry their own weight and felt the ache of both pride and grief, leave a comment. Let someone else know that hope is real, even when it comes slowly. The most unexpected part, we actually started laughing together again. Not forced laughter, not paper over cracks laughter, but real from the gut remember why we ever loved each other kind of laughter. At Thanksgiving, Madison brought homemade cranberry sauce from scratch. She spilled some on the table and said, "Guess I'm not knocking over a cake this time, huh?" It was a risk, a reference, a challenge. But it landed. I looked at her, and I laughed. Because I finally could. If this story has made you think of someone in your life, someone you've loved, enabled, forgiven, or finally let go of, I invite you to leave a comment and subscribe. Let's keep building stories that say we can heal even after the cake is on the floor. Healing, I've learned, doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering differently. There was a time when I couldn't think about Madison without feeling a surge of tension in my shoulders. The way she weaponized guilt, how easily she tore through boundaries, her entitlement, her smirks, her perfectly timed tears. But now I could think of her without flinching. Not because I trusted her completely, but because I finally trusted myself enough to know I didn't need her to change in order for me to feel safe. Still, that didn't mean I let my guard down entirely. One Saturday, just a few weeks before the 6-month mark of our wedding, Madison texted me. "Dinner, just us. I have something I want to show you." Old instincts rose immediately. What does she want? Is she planning something? Is this another test? But I also remembered how for the last few months, she hadn't asked for a single thing. Not money, not favors, not validation. She just showed up quietly, repeatedly. So I agreed. We met at a cozy restaurant tucked between an art supply store and a vintage bookshop, one of those quirky little places that always smells faintly of garlic and old wood. Madison wore jeans, a cardigan, and no trace of her old theatrics. She slid into the booth and grinned. "No drama tonight, I promise." I raised an eyebrow. She pulled out a thin folder and set it on the table between us. "I've been working on this with my counselor. It's a financial recovery plan. My debts, my goals, my strategy." I flipped it open and blinked. Color-coded charts, payment timelines, expense tracking. It was legitimate. Detailed, responsible, adult. "I wanted you to see it," she said. Not because I need anything, just because you're the first person I've ever wanted to prove something to instead of get something from. That hit harder than I expected. She wasn't trying to impress me. She was showing her work like a student who finally learned the material and couldn't wait for the teacher to see she understood. "I'm proud of you," I said, and I meant it. She didn't tear up, didn't make it into a hallmark moment. She just nodded and smiled. We talked for over 2 hours. About money, sure, but also about relationships, regret, memory, mom and dad. The weird way grief can show up when you're growing, because part of you misses the comfort of old dysfunction, even when it hurt. And then came the unexpected confession. "You know," she said, pushing the last of her pasta around her plate, "I knew what I was doing that night. With the cake." I held my breath. "I didn't trip, I didn't bump it, I planned it, and I'm not telling you this so you'll forgive me. I don't want that lie between us anymore." Her voice wasn't trembling. It was steady, and I felt something else settle in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but the kind of release that comes from finally hearing the words you already knew were true, spoken out loud without excuse. If someone you love has ever come back, not with a defense but with ownership, you'll know how rare and powerful that is. Share your moment in the comments. Let's honor that honesty when it shows up. I nodded. "That cake," I said, "meant a lot more than just dessert." "I know," she whispered. "And I ruined it, but I'm trying to build something different now." She tapped her folder, tier by tier. And just like that, the metaphor landed. What she broke with 5 tiers of buttercream, she was now rebuilding, layer by layer. Maybe one day she'd build something just as beautiful. And maybe she wouldn't knock it over this time. The quiet understanding we'd reached that night at dinner didn't erase the past, but it gave us something new. A starting line neither of us had ever crossed before. And with that beginning came the slow, awkward, but surprisingly steady process of building a relationship that wasn't based on guilt, obligation, or rivalry. Still, I was cautious. I wasn't ready to toss around words like close or forgiven. I wasn't even sure if I liked Madison, not yet. But for the first time in our adult lives, I didn't resent her presence in a room. I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact every time she opened her mouth. I was learning to be neutral. And for a family like mine, where emotion had always swung wildly between indulgence and avoidance, neutrality felt like a miracle. A few weeks later, I got a call from my dad. "I think you'd be proud of your sister," he said. I laughed, unsure. "What did she do? Refrain from setting something on fire?" He chuckled. "No, she spoke to your mom about boundaries." That got my attention. Apparently, Madison had come by for dinner. My mom, in her well-meaning but often emotionally clumsy way, started making comments about how much nicer things were when everyone was under one roof, and maybe soon Madison could move in again for a while just to save on rent. Madison, to my shock, had politely declined. "I love you," she told our mom, "but I need to learn how to live on my own. I need to get uncomfortable." That phrase, "get uncomfortable," echoed in my head for days. I didn't know if she'd read it in a self-help book or picked it up in counseling, but she understood it. Growth isn't cozy. It's supposed to stretch you, pull at the edges of who you think you are until you make room for who you could be. And now my sister, the same person who once knocked over a wedding cake out of spite, was choosing discomfort over convenience. I didn't say anything to her about it right away, but a week later I sent her a low-maintenance snake plant with a little handwritten card. "For your place. Growth suits you." She replied with a photo of it on her windowsill and 3 words I never thought I'd hear from her. "This means something. Not you're the best sister ever. Not we're healed now. Just acknowledgement, respect, space." And then a few days later, she did something even more unexpected. She offered to help me. I was prepping for a large open house event, a luxury listing in Buckhead, with over 100 potential buyers and agents expected. My assistant was out sick, the caterer was behind schedule, and I was sweating through a silk blouse that did not deserve that fate. Madison showed up uninvited, but with a tote full of bottled water, folding signs, and printed property sheets. "I figured you might need a hand," she said. "I've been learning a thing or two in marketing, might as well practice on the real thing." And you know what? She was helpful. Efficient, professional, even likable. Not once did she demand attention. Not once did she make it about her. By the end of the day, she'd charmed 24 people into joining the waiting list, and secured enough leads for me to consider giving her a commission percentage, which I did. When I Venmo'd her later that night, she replied with, "No way. This was me giving, not taking. You've done enough." And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt toward my sister in years. Appreciation. If you've ever had a relationship, transform in slow, small moments, not grand apologies. Tell me how you recognized the change. I think we forget how much power there is in the quiet stuff. That day I realized something important. Rebuilding trust doesn't look like a movie montage. It's not tearful speeches and dramatic makeups. It's water bottles in a tote bag. It's printed flyers. It's showing up not because you have to, but because you want to. And just like that, tier by tier, Madison kept building. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to hope that she might not knock it all down. If you had told me a year ago that I'd one day invite Madison voluntarily to dinner in my home, I would have laughed and poured myself another glass of wine. But here we were, 6 months after the wedding, a new chapter written not in grand declarations but in cautious gestures, consistency, and most importantly, boundaries that held. Ethan and I had finally finished our kitchen remodel, and to celebrate, we hosted a small dinner for a few close friends, my parents, and yes, Madison. She arrived with her boyfriend Mark, a quiet, thoughtful accountant she'd met in her financial literacy class. There was no dramatic entrance, no flashy outfit, no last-minute complaints about the color of the napkins or the vibe of the evening. Just a warm hug at the door, a bottle of wine, and a shy smile that said, "I know this matters." The night felt different. No one was tiptoeing around old wounds. There was laughter, real laughter over burnt garlic bread stories from my dad's college days, and Mark's surprisingly solid attempt at a French accent. And Madison? She was soft-spoken, present, gracious. At one point she leaned over and whispered, "This is the most normal I've ever felt at a family dinner." I didn't say anything. I just smiled and passed her the mashed potatoes. Because sometimes healing doesn't sound like forgiveness. Sometimes it sounds like, "Here, have seconds." After dessert, a mini version of the infamous wedding cake, which my friends had lovingly recreated for our photo album, we moved to the back deck. The sky was painted in warm hues of lavender and orange. Coffee in hand, I sank into a patio chair between my mom and Madison. The silence was gentle, and then Mom reached for my hand. "I owe you something," she said quietly. "An apology I should have given you a long time ago." My heart thudded. For years, she continued, "I asked you to carry more than your share because I thought you could. And I asked you to excuse Madison's behavior because I thought she couldn't help it. I see now. That wasn't fair to either of you." I didn't cry. I thought I might. But instead, I felt a wave of calm roll through me. Not just because she said the words, but because she finally meant them. "I've spent months watching your sister become someone I didn't know she could be," she said, glancing at Madison. "But that growth, it started because you drew a line." Madison looked down at her hands, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. "I didn't make it easy," she said. "I manipulated. I blamed. I wanted to stay the victim because it was easier than being responsible." The air shifted, not heavy, honest. "I'm not proud of who I was," she added, "but I like who I'm becoming." If you've ever had a moment where someone who hurt you finally took ownership, not because they were cornered, but because they were ready, I'd love to hear what it changed for you. Drop it in the comments. Someone out there is holding their breath, hoping that moment can be real. We stayed on the deck long after the sun dipped below the trees. Dad and Ethan brought out more coffee. Mark offered to help with dishes. For the first time in our family's history, no one raised their voice. No one left in a cloud of tension. And as I watched Madison lean into Mark's shoulder, quietly laughing at something Mom said, I realized I wasn't waiting for the next explosion. I wasn't preparing to defend myself. I was just here, in this moment, breathing, free. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time, everyone at that table had chosen growth over comfort, including me. People always talk about rock bottom like it's a place you land. But sometimes rock bottom isn't one explosive moment. It's a quiet realization, one that creeps in when you're sitting across from someone you thought you hated, and you realize you don't. You just never got to know who they really were. Because the person you hated was the version of them that was never asked to grow. 6 months after Madison knocked over my wedding cake, she stood beside me in my kitchen helping me pipe rosettes onto a batch of cupcakes. We laughed awkwardly as I tried to swirl icing the way the bakery had taught me. She nudged me with her elbow and said, "Okay, this one looks like a snowstorm hit it." I rolled my eyes. "You're lucky I love you." Her smile wavered just for a second. I know. It wasn't a joke. It was a truth, quiet, soft, and completely vulnerable. And that moment stuck with me. Because love, real love, isn't about letting someone destroy your boundaries over and over and calling it loyalty. It's about standing still when they push and refusing to move until they finally stop. And look at the damage. Madison had looked, and she hadn't run away. She stayed. She took the financial classes, she paid down over half her debt, she kept her job, she showed up on time. She learned to say, "I'm sorry," without a follow-up excuse. And perhaps most importantly, she stopped expecting applause. That's how I knew she'd changed. It wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about making me see her. It was about her finally seeing herself clearly, and maybe for the first time. Last week she sent me a photo of her own cake, a tiny one-tier vanilla buttercream she'd baked with Mark. Not fancy her text read, but made from scratch. And I cried. Because this girl, the one who once thought everything should be handed to her, was now making things with her own hands. Not for show, but for herself. If you've ever watched someone become the version of themselves you never believed they could be, and it moved something in you, tell me below. Because that kind of growth deserves to be witnessed, not just remembered. There's a photo I keep on my desk now. It's not from the wedding, not the cake shoot redo, not even our honeymoon. It's one Ethan took when I wasn't looking, a candid of me sitting on the back deck, coffee in hand, with the light catching my face just right. I look content. Not elated, not exhausted, just at peace. And that photo means more to me than any framed diploma, any sold listing, any perfect moment. Because it reminds me that choosing myself, my boundaries, my healing, my truth was what led to everything else falling into place. Not instantly. Not cleanly. But honestly, I used to think standing up for myself would cost me my family. What I didn't realize, it saved them too. Yeah. If you've made it this far, thank you. This wasn't just a story about a ruined cake. It was a story about power, who we give it to, and what happens when we finally take it back. If you believe that choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish, it makes you free. I hope you'll like, comment, and subscribe. Let's keep telling stories that remind us boundaries aren't the end of love. Sometimes they're the beginning. 6 months. That's how long it took to go from standing in a pile of buttercream in disbelief to sitting at a quiet dinner table sharing stories with the very people I once thought I'd lose forever. But it wasn't the time that healed us. It was the choice. The choice to stop explaining pain away. The choice to set a boundary and mean it. The choice to let the silence be uncomfortable, instead of immediately filling it with false peace. For so long I thought love meant giving until I disappeared. Now I know love without respect is just a performance. And performances always end. What lasts is truth. Real, raw, sometimes ugly truth. The kind that forces everyone to look in the mirror, including yourself. Because healing doesn't mean the pain never happened. It means you've stopped letting it define what happens next. Today, my relationship with Madison is still a work in progress. There are days we misstep. Days we feel the past pulling at us like an old familiar tide. But we've learned to swim in deeper waters now. She doesn't ask me to save her anymore. And I no longer feel guilty for choosing peace. If there's one thing this entire journey taught me, it's this. Sometimes the most radical act of love for yourself and for others is refusing to be the cleanup crew for someone else's chaos. Let them fall. Let them flail. And if they rise, let them rise on their own terms. Not because you rescued them, but because you finally stepped back far enough for them to see what they'd been doing all along. And if they don't rise, then at least you'll know this. You gave love without losing yourself. And that is always enough. Thank you for walking this journey with me. I hope wherever you are in yours, you know you have the right to peace, to space, and to a life that feels like yours. Always.